Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series. And, okay, when I first found these two books in the EXITORN series by Peggy Downing in Foley, Alabama, by chance at a used bookstore, I had no idea the journey I was about to go on, because this was a book series I had never heard of before. It was from the 1980s, and I remember thinking, oh, I have some sticker on my thumb. And I remember thinking, I've never heard of this series before. What is this book series? Is it any good? And I saw these two and I almost passed up on them. Based on actually this cover right here, I was like, what is going on in this cover? These people in like Hawaiian looking shirts? I don't even know. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in that cover. And then I saw this one, and this one looked more intriguing to me, and I thought, what is this all about? So these EXITORN Adventures, there were only 6 of these books that came out, and they came out in the 80s, and they are actually really hard to find. Super hard to find. But I have now managed to get my hands on the entire series, and I am now on, as of the recording of this video, book number 3. And I am really loving these books. These books are so surprising. So today I want to review BRILL and the Dragators, book number 1 in the EXITORN Adventures series by Peggy Downing. There is so much to talk about with this book. First off, I gotta say, this is a fantasy series from the 80s, and it's that kind of fantasy that's like a medieval fantasy. I have so many thoughts about these books, so many things I want to say. So this is a fantasy series. It's a Christian fantasy series, and here's the thing about Christian fantasy. Sometimes, and I have been reviewing some of these on my channel, sometimes Christian fantasy books will start with a Bible lesson or a Bible story that the book tries to teach and wants to teach, and it's almost like that was the first thing that came to mind, and then a story became like a secondary thing that they were doing in the book. Peggy Downing, however, is just a good storyteller. She knows how to tell a story. And she does have these Christian elements that are woven throughout, and I'm going to talk about them because sometimes it works really well and sometimes it's a little clunky how she pulls it in, but her storyline is so good. In this book, Brill, he is a kid who lives in the kingdom of EXITORN. He's 12 years old, and one day he is chosen to be the prince's new companion at the palace. And so he's taken from his family, all his friends, taken to the palace where the evil emperor Amain makes him be a friend to his son, the Prince Gloucester. Now, Gloucester is so vile and reminds me so much of Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It was just the same energy. And just, he was very like picky and annoying and always wanted everything a certain way. And Brill finds himself trapped in this palace and he doesn't know what to do. He wants to leave, but he's also a little torn because he's thinking, I'm living in luxury where I used to be living in squalor. And so what do I do with that? Well, Brill meets Segra, who is the companion to Princess Florette, who is the daughter of the emperor. And Segra and Brill discover that the previous king of EXITORN, the good king everyone loved, is still alive and captured on the palace grounds. Can they rescue the king, or will they be thrown to the Dragators, which are these dragon alligator creatures that live in the moat and are eager to chomp up anyone who comes too close? Oh, this book had so many twists and turns, so much action, so many great moments that it is a shame that this book is so hard to find. Now, this book is going north of usually $80 when you're looking online. And so it's a hard book to find unless you find the edition that was published in England or in Australia, which is a lot cheaper, but the same exact story. And that is the edition I found. So right off the bat, I gotta say, for a Christian fantasy series, I cannot give enough kudos to Peggy Downing for her creation of the character of Segra. She is perhaps one of the best Christian fantasy female protagonists there ever has been. And I am not exaggerating, because a lot of times here's what happens. In a lot of books from this era, female characters are often relegated to be the damsel in distress, to be the one who's just kind of screaming in a corner while the boy does all the action and all the planning and all the executing of the plan. And I just gotta say, first of all, Segra has so much agency in this book. From the 1980s, she has so much agency. But she does not have agency at the expense of Brill. And I think this is something that's really important. There have been a lot of different kinds of stories where it's almost like putting down someone else for the sake of lifting someone else up. And I think that it is better when we are all lifted up together. It's kind of like the idea that, there is space at the table for everyone if we make the table bigger. And I think that that is the way that Peggy Downing approached these characters, because she could have written Segra as the damsel in distress, but she did not. She wrote Segra as having agency, but also as being a person who works well with Brill. And Brill is not the kind of character who's just sitting there like, oh, these girls that are so annoying and I just want to be done with her and she's so bothersome and oh, she has so many silly things she does. Brill admires Segra and often remarks on how brave she is and how she does things that he would never dream to do. And so they work together so well as a team. Now, this book reminded me a lot of the storytelling style of Lloyd Alexander and the Chronicles of Prydain, with the characterization between like Princess Eilonwy and Taran. Only Eilonwy in those books doesn't even have as much agency as Segra does. And she comes off sometimes a little whiny, and Segra never comes off that way. Segra is very brave, and she is very willing to do what it takes to get the thing done. And she's willing to say, we need to partner together and do this together because we can't do it by ourselves. We've got to work together. So I really appreciated that. The other style this kind of reminded me of was, this is very much like the Chronicles of Narnia in the storytelling style. There's a little bit of that clipped feel to the language, and I think that it works really well for this kind of medieval fantasy type story that's really set in a medieval past and a fantasy world, where there's not really much magic or things going on, but there are strange creatures. There is a lot of danger and a lot of threat to what is happening. But I will say, the thing that I do think where this book shines a little more than Chronicles of Narnia, I know, I said it. I think that Narnia sometimes gets bogged down a little bit by its allegory, which is great. I am not against the allegory in Narnia. I think it's a great, well-told story as well. However, these books do not get bogged down by allegory because they're not an allegory. An allegory, if you haven't read an allegory, that is a story where mostly every single thing represents something. So like John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress is a book that is a strong allegory where every single little thing means something else. So you have like the character of Pilgrim who's on a journey and then has this like big bag of burdens on his back that he's carrying, and it's supposed to be like the burdens of life and sin, and he has to leave it at the feet of, God in that story to find forgiveness. And he literally leaves the bag of things on him behind. So, and in Narnia, you have Aslan, who is a representative of Jesus, who, Aslan dies on the table and is killed and comes back to life, just like Jesus was killed and comes back to life. But these books are not an allegory. They are telling a story that is unique. And I think that is actually a strength for this style of storytelling, because you don't get bogged down on details. Sometimes people get a little bogged down on Chronicles of Narnia and wondering, well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And what is this all about? And wait, C.S. Lewis said this about this, so is that something? And that can lead to like these endless debates where this is just a good story. Now, I will say, sometimes in book number 1 here, some of the Christian message gets a little bit tacked on, a little bit added in here and there. Sometimes it works really well, but sometimes I thought, are you just like throwing that in there to be like, remember, this is a Christian book, so we got to talk about Jesus a little bit. That's kind of how it came across a couple times. But I will say, by book number 3, Peggy Downing has this whole idea down. She incorporates those things in a really organic way in book 3, which I'm going to talk about obviously at another point because I can't get enough of this series right now. I just have to say too, the danger in this book also reminded me a lot of those really classic stories where the characters are just in a place where you do not know how they're going to get out of this. And at some point, some people might think there's a little bit of Deus Ex Machina here, where characters kind of show up and do a thing and help out save the day. But again, Brill and Segra have a lot of agency, and there are a lot of great twists and turns, and they are the ones who have to figure out what to do. And they come to some really startling conclusions, and they have to face some things that are really dangerous, which I will say, this is the other thing that shocked me about this book. The death count is real. In this book that's like 120 pages, not very long, but there is danger. You do not know who's going to survive. You do not know who's going to make it out. And I thought that was very intriguing. Also, like I said, I got a lot to say about this book. Peggy Downing, she weaves in so many great details throughout the story that will come up later in later books. She's very masterful at weaving these things in. I only wish Peggy Downing was still alive. She passed away a few years ago, and I wish she was alive because I would write to her and I would tell her how brilliant she was, because she was brilliant. This is such a good story. It deserves to be read, and in fact, this book gets 5 stars from me. That is right. 5 whole stars all the way across. I read this thing so fast. I loved every minute of it. It was the kind of medieval, middle grade fiction that I love. It also, one other it reminded me of, it really reminded me of a book called Adam of the Road, which was such an incredible book. It has a lot of similar flavor to that, where there's a little bit of coming of age style stuff going on. The character development is great. The settings are just breathtaking throughout this book. And I gotta say, the Dragators are super scary. And I loved this creation. It's just brilliant all the way across the board. Brilliant. I cannot get enough of this series. I cannot wait to go finish reading book 3 and then read book 4 and book 5 and book 6. Because I have to read all of them. I need to know what happens. Because this is just such a good story. I will say, if you're looking into this series at all, do not read the back matter of any books past book 1, because something was spoiled for me about book 2 because I read it on the back of book 3. So just a fair warning, don't read the back matter of any of the further books except for book 1. If you want to read that one, go for it. If you love cozy, but also lots of danger and suspense fiction that is like the medieval fantasy style, you will love this. This book was just so good. I can't get enough of it. It may not be for everyone, and that's totally fine. But for me, this was a 5-star read. So until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.